Today's vintage advice comes from the Miss Manners Guide to Excruciatingly Correct Behavior. Today's theme is social intercourse. Dear Miss Manners, a woman I met at a party asked me to guess her age. I thought she was about 40, even though she was wearing a satin disco dress and carrying a pocketbook shaped like a heart, and I said so. Well, it turns out she is 33 and is always being asked for proof that she's of legal drinking age, so I was supposed to guess that she was a teenager. I felt trapped by the whole thing. What should I have done? Gentle reader, you were trapped, so you might as well have gone along with the silly game. Why didn't you demand to see her teeth before answering? Dear Miss Manners, I'm a secretary, and not the cute young type. I am a mature woman married 44 years who spent 25 years as a housewife. I was always careful to avoid qualifying my title as just a housewife. I'm equally careful to avoid saying just a secretary. However, it seems that either title demeans one socially. The other night, a young woman asked where I worked and was very impressed when I told her the name of the prestigious institution. She immediately wanted to know what I did there, and when I said I was a secretary, you would have thought I suddenly came down with a terminal disease. Even worse were her parting words. Well, even though you're just a secretary, it must be an interesting place to work. Miss Manners, I am so tired of wearing the scarlet S. Can you suggest any way to avoid this situation? Gentle reader, just a is indeed an offensive qualifier, and the only sure way to avoid hearing it is to stay away from rude people. That is hardly possible in this world. You know that Miss Manners does not allow her readers to answer rudeness with rudeness, but you might say with polite pride, "Oh, no, you're mistaken. I started out as just a secretary, but now I'm a full secretary." Dear Miss Manners, a well-dressed, middle-aged man sitting next to me in an airplane asked if I was a career girl. I know what this means, and I consider it an insult. It means I am some young chick busying herself by playing at working while waiting to get married, and may be interested in some fun with the likes of him in the meantime. I have a career, of course, if that means I work for a living like everyone else, but you don't go around asking strangers if they have jobs. I just said no, curtly, and turned away from him, but I'm still mad. What should I have done? Gentle reader, Miss Manners hesitates to assume evil intent in matters where differences of age may make significant semantic differences. You should have merely asked him in turn if he was a career boy. Dear Miss Manners, I react to questions about my daughter-in-law and son from people who ask, "Well, any babies?" or "Are you going to be a grandmother?" by glaring at them and saying, "I don't ask them such questions." Certainly, it is not my business nor anyone else's, but even so, perhaps I have blown this up more than is necessary. Is there a polite response? Gentle reader, one can hardly exaggerate the rudeness of inquiring into the contents of someone else's womb. Sooner or later, these people will get a burst of tears for an answer from some couple unable to conceive a child. Miss Manners considers your answer or a cool, "I have no idea," civil enough, under the circumstances. Short of producing those tears, the couple may answer when or why questions about babies. When are you going to have children? Why don't you have children yet? Or why aren't you going to have children? With a frosty look and a firm, "One never knows, does one?" Miss Manners does not approve of rude answers, even to rude questions, but rough, honest answers, such as, "Why should we burden ourselves?" are as bad. "Do you?" questions, "Do you have any children?" are legitimate and should be answered legitimately. That is, one only has to admit to legitimate children. Dear Miss Manners, what do you consider a good conversation opener? Gentle reader, almost anything except, "I've been on a wonderful journey of self-discovery lately, and I'd love to share it with you." Dear Miss Manners, what suggestions can you offer to a social klutz who absolutely dreads going to parties and social events where I will meet new people? I get so uptight about saying the wrong thing that I usually do. I'm fine around people who know me, and I'm a fairly successful hostess, but I am a terrible guest. Gentle reader, most people develop clever opening lines for such events. If you let them deliver these statements and say only, "Oh, how interesting, tell me about it," you will soon have a reputation as a charming person and a fascinating conversationalist. Dear Miss Manners, I have a friend who talks all the time about his ancestors. He didn't used to, but now he's involved in what he calls a history project about his family, and we're never going to hear the end of it. It sounds like plain old bragging. Isn't this topic considered taboo among polite people? Gentle reader, among polite people descended from the upper class, yes, but bragging about one's ancestors is quite fashionable now if one can claim to be descended from the lower classes. Many such claims are exaggerated, of course. Dear Miss Manners, is it impolite to gaze about the room while someone is talking to you, or is it only a bad habit? Thank you for your undivided attention to this problem. You are welcome. The person who is... What were you saying? Please forgive Miss Manners. Her attention was distracted for a moment by something more interesting going on up there in the tree. Certainly, it is a bad habit. It means that one is searching for someone better with whom to talk to than one's present companion. It is, however, standard procedure at cocktail parties, but then cocktail parties are a bad habit too. Dear Miss Manners, shame on you. You wrote about people who look about the room while someone is talking to them. I do it too. The reason? The same as it's always been. I am shy. Well, gentle reader, you seem to be getting over it. Dear Miss Manners, last night a friend was telling me her dream. The subject matter and her description of it were both personal and esoteric. We were interrupted by a friend of mine, a stranger to her, coming over. I interrupted her saying that perhaps she should finish later. When the visitor left, I suggested she finish her story. I felt she was slightly hurt. She changed the subject, and I heard no more about her dream. This must be a common occurrence. Did I act improperly? If so, what should I do in the future? Gentle reader, life is full of interrupted dreams, but Miss Manners doesn't know that it is all that common to have your dreamers pout about not being able to tell them to strangers. You behave properly. Dear Miss Manners, what is your response to a lewd remark? Gentle reader, people do not make lewd remarks to Miss Manners. If they did, her response would be a sweet smile, accompanied by a naive but earnest request to explain exactly what the remark meant. The result would be that even if the person made the first lewd remark to Miss Manners, he would never make a second. Dear Miss Manners, help. I have a dear friend who, at the tender age of 33, has turned into an old Jewish woman. The phrases, oy vey, and God forbid you should, have invaded her speech to the extent that I need a comeback, a quick retort, or something. Gentle reader, the phrases and quote strike Miss Manners as being vivid and useful, if not eloquent, and Miss Manners is not so foolish as to attempt to top them. Dear Miss Manners, after attending a recital in which a friend had taken a part, I was asked by the friend what I thought of his performance. What would be the proper response for a poor performance? Should I give a detailed criticism of the faults and merits, or simply a pat on the back, very good, etc.? And for an exceedingly good one, is a bubbling enthusiasm appropriate or merely a standard compliment? Gentle reader, bubbling enthusiasm is alike appropriate for poor and exceedingly good performances, the idea being deliberately to confuse the performer about which one he gave. This is what friends are for. Music teachers and music critics exist for other purposes. Dear Miss Manners, what is the appropriate comment to make about a portrait of a person you do not wish to insult, even if that portrait is dreadful? My friend paid a lot of money to get this atrocity painted and is very proud of it. I don't want to hurt his feelings, but I don't want him to quote me to mutual friends approving of his awful taste. Gentle reader, it's wonderful how he got that texture of your tie, and it has your dignity, but there is something not quite right about the mouth. Dear Miss Manners, what do you say if someone you don't like gives you a compliment? Gentle reader, thank you. Dear Miss Manners, when an elderly person tells a joke that has been heard before or repeats something previously said, what should the other person say? I've heard that before, or you told me, or simply act as if they've never heard it before. Gentle reader, it is not only the elderly who tend to repeat themselves, as Miss Manner often says. There is one method of heading off a repeated story, but one must be quick about it. Jump right in at the beginning and say, "Oh, I love that story," or, "Is that the hilarious joke you told us? I've been trying to tell it myself." Sometimes a "Yes, so you were telling us" works if it is accompanied by an interested expression, as if the listener were waiting for the talker to tell a sequel. However, often nothing works, in which case you should listen gracefully. We should all be tolerant of the foibles of age. With luck, we will achieve them ourselves. Dear Miss Manners, I'm having a somewhat unusual disagreement with my new roommate on a point of etiquette. We share a dormitory room. It is my habit to pray silently each evening before retiring. Whenever I try to do so in our room, however, my roommate throws things at me or chases me out of the building. He says it's rude to carry on a private conversation in the presence of a third party. I say he's full of it. What do you say? Gentle reader, a person who attacks violently one who is engaged in prayer is obviously a great authority on etiquette, whom it would be futile and probably dangerous to contradict. However, Miss Manners would point out that your roommate is perfectly free to join in these conversations with the third party, provided he observes the convention that you do, of doing it in silence. Dear Miss Manners, would you be so kind as to advise me on choosing between hypocrisy and non-hypocrisy? My office is so arranged that phone calls, business and non-business, can be overheard by several neighboring workers. I pretend not to hear the content of personal conversations, but I'm often tempted to chime in later to give business information to individuals whom I have overheard. Should I pretend that I cannot overhear their call? Gentle reader, yes. Hypocrisy is a higher form of human behavior than eavesdropping. Besides, you have only overheard one side of the conversation, and that can be misleading. And besides that, such information is more valuable when stored up for private use than when given out freely, as if it had been legitimately acquired. Dear Miss Manners, must you say please to your dog when commanding him to sit? Sit sounds so dictatorial. Gentle reader, how else are you going to teach him to say thank you? If you do not wish to act as a superior to your dog, even "please sit" is somewhat strong. What about, "Oh, do sit down and make yourself comfortable"? Dear Miss Manners, my son and his wife have 6 children. They are all through college, some married except 2 girls still at home. One of them is getting married in June. Last night I said to my daughter-in-law, "Well, how will it feel with only one child at home?" She said, "She is not a child." That was her only reply. I said, "Well, all mothers say children if speaking to one about their family. It wouldn't sound right to say, well, how would it feel to only have one adult left?" What would the correct phrase be? Gentle reader, the word child means offspring of any age, as well as meaning a minor. What is incorrect here is the use of semantic double talk for the purpose of putting down one's mother-in-law. Dear Miss Manners, when is it appropriate to say ciao? Gentle reader, when in Rome. Dear Miss Manners, what is the proper and correct term to use when referring to a lady's lower undergarment? Is it panties or underpants? I've always called them panties, but recently I've noticed that most of the women I know here call them underpants, and they laugh at me when I say panties. Which is correct? Gentle reader, panties is the nickname for underpants, and much like tummy for stomach, has a certain childish charm, but not very much. Miss Manners is not vehemently opposed to panties as she is to lingerie, a silly way of referring to the perfectly respectable institution of underwear. She loves to drive department store clerks crazy by inquiring about the underwear department and watching them look puzzled. Dear Miss Manners, when is it appropriate to call a vase a vase? Gentle reader, when filling them with daisies. Those are all the questions and advice that I have for you today. Let me know in the comments, what is your modern day advice to these vintage problems?